It's not sustainable for three parties to coexist on those numbers. So one party will have to be beaten back one way or the other. And to be frank, Conservatives should not assume that it will be another party. It could be us, which is why we have a massive responsibility to take this situation incredibly seriously. The country is facing massive challenges, and we have been in a really bad way politically. There's no God-given right for political parties to exist. So we have to put in the hard yards, and we have to be really, really honest with people and do much better.
But good to meet you, man.
Yeah, and you. Sorry, I think I fucked up the first one.
Doesn't matter.
But
we're all friends.
I'm the world's worst person with diaries. So.
Don't worry about it. It happens. We get cancellations. And I like I say, I had to cancel 5 people recently because of this, so it happens. I'm going to need you to do more of the talking today because of...
Sure.
But loads I want to talk to you about.
Yeah.
Mainly starting with... I went to Tesco's this morning, and this first time I've seen this. I can show you the photos. I don't know if you've been recently, but it's really saddened me. So they've got these screens on here now. This cabinet is locked for security reasons. Please. It reminds me of going to San Francisco, and to me, it's like a wider signal of the decay that's happening that feels everywhere at the moment. And
yeah,
I'd be interested to start with to understand from you what you think, where you're at with all this, because we feel like we're in a bad place.
We are in a bad place. I think to answer that question specifically, you can go really narrow and start talking about police reform and what we need to do with criminal justice. But actually, you can also step right back. And I think it's undeniable that the country's in a bad place. But if you look at the wider West, we're not alone, really. And I think there's all sorts of things that we could talk about, whether it's about economic stagnation. We haven't really grown properly since the financial crash. Actually, some of the growth before the financial crash was illusory. That's what the crash was all about. It was a bubble. There are really serious social and cultural questions. We're losing our cultural coherence, partly because of mass immigration and radical diversity, but also because of quite divisive ideologies that try to pick away at what we are. And shared identity is so important. And I think if you put all of these things together, that probably starts to explain why we're seeing all sorts of symptoms, whether it's things like lawlessness, but whether it's also the kind of loss of confidence that Western countries have internationally, all sorts of different things.
Well, I definitely want to start with economics. It's the area I'm most interested in. I've read a bunch of your articles on the Telegraph as well, so I know it's an important subject for you. And I am just, to set the state where we are, I am a Conservative. I've only ever voted Conservative. I'd say a small C Conservative. I didn't vote in the last 2 or 3 elections. Struggled with the Conservative Party, and I know you've talked about where the Conservative Party needs to be, but definitely on the economic side of things. And I feel like under Labour, they're accelerating the problems.
Yeah, it's my personal view that our economic model that has existed, arguably for my whole lifetime is broken. It's gone. It needs to be replaced. And again, it's really complicated, but I think that the starting point to try to understand where we're going wrong is something that I think a lot of people feel quite intuitively anyway, which is that Britain as a country, and again, this is true in lots of Western countries, not all of them, but Britain consumes and imports far more than it produces and it exports, and in the end, that's unsustainable. So you might have orthodox economists say, well, it's not such a big deal because if you run a trade deficit, then actually the arising current account deficit can be addressed with flows of capital from overseas. And that's true up until a point. I'm not saying that there needs to be a race where everyone tries to be a surplus country, but we're at a point where we're running such massive surpluses, such massive deficits, and have done for such a long time that a lot of the investment, which we euphemistically call it, isn't really investment. A lot of it's just sometimes asset stripping, sometimes it's buying up land and property and making some of those things harder to afford for the people who live here, and it's contributing to the problem because our dependence on foreign investment is sometimes contributing to the decline in productive capacity that we have.
Is that's one of the problems? It's not the only problem.
No, but it's kind of my way into explaining how I see the broader problem. There's loads more problems than that, obviously.
So what do you think we need to replace that economic model with?
Well, I think we need to think about trade very differently, and this is now obviously a really live topic of conversation because of what President Trump is trying to do, not just with tariffs, but with the negotiations that I think he's lining up to try to rebalance world trade.
Are you a fan?
I understand what he's trying to do, whether it's the right way to do it or whether he's being too aggressive and whether he's destroying trust and goodwill among allies is, I think something that will be tested with time and we'll see. But he sees that China has completely transformed the international trading system. And when Bill Clinton signed the free trade agreement between America and China into law, effectively paved the way for China to join the WTO, he said, we're going to be able to export more products. We'll be able to export liberty and political freedom, but we won't be exporting any jobs. And that was obviously not true. And in America, just the same as here, we've seen deindustrialization. And China's status as a developing country in the WTO allows it to avoid all the rules that we Western countries have to respect ourselves. And they've been holding down our currency. They've been using slave labor, holding down production costs, systematically stealing industrial secrets from the West. They're abiding by none of the rules, and then they're overproducing in key sectors like steel, and then dumping them on the West. And basically trying to force Western companies out of business, because I think they know that if they destroy the productive capacity of the West, they destroy Western power. This is the economics and the geopolitics are completely tied up, and I think Trump sees that, and he doesn't just point the finger at China. He points it at the European Union, but in particular Germany. Germany's a bit different. It's not as flagrant as the Chinese. It's obviously a much smaller market anyway. But I think that's what he's trying to do. And I think he's trying to bring the Western countries to the table so that we can agree a new model of trade that I think probably pulls the Europeans away from the Chinese and tries to ensure that there is still productive capacity in the democracies. And obviously, from his perspective, in America. I don't know whether it will work, but I think that's what he's trying to achieve.
And what do you think we need to do here?
Well, we need to get real about trade, and we need to work with other Western countries to make sure that China doesn't do the things I just described. But I think the mission for us is to rebalance the economy in a really meaningful way by reindustrializing. That will take huge policy changes. We've just touched on some of the trading challenges. We have the most expensive industrial energy prices in the West. That's completely unsustainable. So we would have to completely change that. We would have to have, I think, a series of policies that would encourage investors and businesses to set themselves up here to manufacture here. And technology in some ways is aiding that, because the way things can be produced now mean that there's a certain emphasis on constructing things closer to market. We've also been through the pandemic, where people saw the reality of very stretched and very thin international supply chains. People are seeing more and more of the reality of China. So there is a bit of a movement in this direction anyway. But policy-wise, we're going to need to have better infrastructure. We're going to need to have better skills and training and retraining for people at different points in their lives. I'm a fan of place-based programs where, if JCB, for example, said we're really keen to try to develop more of a domestic supply chain near where we're based, you could designate an area and you could remove regulations and you could create incentives for that to happen. So I think there's loads of different policy things you could do, but I think the really big things are about trade, energy prices, tax and regulation.
The humble bee, a keystone species crucial to the survival of Earth's inhabitants. Here's how things would look if bees vanished. And here's how they'd look if humans vanished. But imagine if instead we became a keystone species by doing things the right way, by taking responsibility for our actions and becoming the solution. Iron mines, the world's most responsible currency, the right way. Because the future depends on it.
What about tax and debt?
Tell me more.
Well, so I operate multiple businesses, and it's so hard. Local businesses. I mean, this is fine, but we have a coffee shop, a football club, and a bar.
Yeah.
And it's getting increasingly hard. We've just been under so much inflationary pressure the last 2 years, but we can't raise our prices at the same rate our suppliers are raising prices because the customers, they're not seeing their wages go up to a similar amount. We've got increasing regulation on employing people. We've got increasing taxes. It's getting to the point where it's just so hard to leap all those hurdles to actually make a profit. But I'm someone who I'd create more businesses if I could. So the taxation and regulatory pressure is hard, but also the inflationary pressure coming from the amount of money the government's borrowing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's all undoubtedly true. I think, if you go back to some of the really big things that I think have done us serious damage over a period of time. I mean, a lot of it actually dates back to the 2000s, where it was in 2008 that the Climate Change Act was passed, and that really led to an increase in industrial energy prices. It was about that time when we had the financial crash and we started experimenting with funny money monetary policy. These things have had really long-lasting effects, and then obviously we've also been through things like the energy crunch and the pandemic, and when governments pump lots of money into an economy, even if it's understandable, and in the case of COVID, I think it probably was given the policies, there will be consequences, and we've suffered inflation as a result. So I think things like monetary policy, which actually weren't really debated very much in politics for a long period, because it felt like that was almost settled after Thatcher, and then after Blair and Brown gave the Bank of England independence. Monetary policy is, I think, something that is more important than people had come to believe. And on tax and regulation, on tax, I think it is undoubtedly difficult because we are an aging society, and because of the numbers of older people, we are going to need to spend more on pensions and health and social care costs. But that doesn't mean nothing can be done. Obviously, there's lots of wasteful spending in government. There's lots of reform that can be done. And there's lots of tax reform that can be done so that you're trying to work out, who you want to carry more of the burden and who you want to carry less of it. And the national insurance rise was a really bad decision. Not just because it was dishonest, because they basically said they weren't going to do it during the election campaign, but because they're loading costs onto employers. And it's obviously bad for business, but it's bad for lots of people, certainly on the edges of the labour market. And I think it's a really bad time for young people in particular.
I think we're kind of at the limit of what people are willing to absorb or can absorb. All my rich friends are leaving the UK. They're moving to Dubai, Portugal. When I say all of them, I'm not lying. Like, literally everybody I speak to is leaving because of the cap gains, tax rises. And one guy even said to me, I won't give you his name, but he said, I don't mind paying tax if the UK feels like a good place to live. But he said, all we've got is high crime, a decay in society. And so there, he's off as well. But all my rich friends are leaving, and everyone who runs a business says it's really hard. And I feel like the kind of tax reform we need it's not a 2.5% here or a 5% there. It's something quite drastic.
Yeah. Well, I think it's so I was talking to somebody in this situation recently, and actually I was reading an interview with Nassef Sawiris, who is the co-owner of Aston Villa Football Club, in which I have quite a strong interest.
Is that your team?
It is indeed my team.
Oh, mate, the PSG game, I thought you'd done it.
I know, it's heartbreaking. And then we lost to Man City, and now I'm not sure whether we're going to get into Champions League again. But both of these guys said the same thing, which is actually that to a degree, they don't really mind paying slightly higher rates of income tax or whatever it is. The thing that's a killer for them is inheritance tax, because if they're hit by a bus, then their families are really screwed, because even though they're on paper very wealthy people, their assets aren't liquid at all. So they get into a situation where there's sort of fire sales with assets and things like that, and nobody wants to really talk about rich people because there's a culture and a kind of fashion in politics, I suppose, to say that they're the bad guys, we need to milk them a bit more or something. But I think we're beginning to see what happens if you push things too far, because, as you say, there is quite an extraordinary exodus of richer people to the Middle East, but to America, to other parts of Europe, and we will all pay the price for that, because they contribute lots, not just in terms of taxes, but also the investments they make in this country.
Yeah, I think inheritance tax is a really interesting point, because everything you've earned, you've already paid tax on. And I don't think people sometimes maybe understand the sacrifices that children pay. Like, that's my son there. And he and my daughter have paid a lot of sacrifices for me to have a career where I've been particularly busy traveling around the world. They've done a lot of things to kind of support their parents, support myself. And I hate the idea that, should I pass, they can't keep the family home. It feels like this is ours. We should have some kind of property rights around this. But could you see a world where inheritance tax is gone?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I don't hold a kind of ideological antipathy towards inheritance tax. It's, Britain has, and other Western countries have, forms of wealth taxes. My wife is from Switzerland, and where my father-in-law lives, there's, I think I'm right in saying, no inheritance tax and no capital gains tax on investment income.
And you can own a gun.
He owns guns, but he pays a recurring 1% wealth tax on his assets. And what that does is it creates an incentive for him to make sure that his money works, because he needs to beat the rate of inflation and plus 1%. And there's a kind of logic to that. Now, we don't have that. We do have inheritance taxes. We do have capital gains tax with the primary household excluded. I'm not going to start writing sort of fantasy tax policies and now get into trouble with my party leader if for no other reason. But the idea that there are wealth taxes in democratic societies is quite well established. We have them. The question is, what's the right combination? And that's the thing about tax policy. It's not just how much are you making, it's what incentives are you creating and what incentives are you destroying. And it feels at the moment that we're destroying quite a lot of them.
Yeah, it's tough out there for people. And that's why some people are leaving. And I find it really sad because the people leaving are the wealth creators, job creators, and they've been particularly demonised, especially in the last 6 months. And I look at the Labour Party and, I want to give them a fair crack. But it seems like they have little to no understanding of basic economics and incentives. I mean, sure, if you scored their report card, it would be low.
I mean, obviously, I'm a little biased, but I think, it seems to me that the country always wants to give a new government a fair chance. This is an unusual government in that it won 2/3 of the seats in the House of Commons with 1/3 of the vote. So, its mandate is legitimate because that's our constitution, but
can I add something
a little
there?
tenuous.
I think they've come in at the wrong time for a Labour Party. I think a Labour Party is good after a period of strong conservatism, which has grown the wealth. Labour will come in and distribute the wealth a bit more. They've come at a time when, really, I think we need a strong Conservative Party.
Yeah, and that was sadly the story in 1997, where they inherited a strong economy and also governed through a fairly benign period, in the world, really. But yeah, this is not a time to come in and start being a sort of left-wing radical. And I think, they found it right. Rachel Reeves introduced her budget late last year. They've increased spending by 8 times more than they said they would in their manifesto.
Wow, which
is a fairly extraordinary thing. They shocked a lot of people because they weren't open about what they were going to do, and it's a cliche that business needs certainty. Markets need to know what's coming, and they didn't do those things. And they also talked down the economy very significantly for political reasons, which in a situation like this is quite a dangerous thing to do, because business confidence, consumer confidence matters. But ultimately, did they really have a plan? Now, if you're being generous, you would say, well, the theme of the budget was that the Chancellor thinks the economy needs more investment, which is not wrong, it does. But because she's very ideological, she's obsessed with the idea that investment needs to be public investment, not private investment. And to fund that investment, she's borrowed more and she's taxed more. And by doing those things, she spooked the bond markets and pushed up the price of borrowing. And she spooked business. And businesses are very reluctant to take people on right now. I spend, lots of my time talking to business owners in West Suffolk, in my constituency, and elsewhere. And the story is all the same. Their confidence is on the floor. They're very worried about the future. Some of them think that they won't be in business in a year's time. And even the analyses that were published alongside her budget last year said that the economic effects of the increase in public investment will be offset by crowding out in the private sector. So it's not really working in its own terms, but it's caused all this damage to the economy.
Do you think they've trapped themselves?
I think they have. Because they were very bold on rhetoric and promises, and not honest about how they were going to pay for the things that they were promising, and about the parameters of policy choices that exist, because with the stock of debt that we have, and the rate of borrowing that she's chosen to pursue, and with what's happening with pensions coming to maturity and so on, the bond markets decide, broadly speaking, what the parameters are, and it's now we're talking about foreign investors determining the costs of government borrowing.
It's crazy. I mean, what I don't understand, obviously I'm not a politician, you are, but...
Just a new one, I'm still learning.
You've been there a while. Is that most economic experts, most advisors were warning them of the consequences of these decisions, and they've all come to fruition. And I wonder, is it incompetence, or do they know, but they're trapped by who they are ideologically as a party?
Yeah, I think it's partly ideology, but I do think it's because they haven't been honest over time. Then they haven't taken people with them. So the people they rely on, their MPs in the parliamentary party, their supporters in the wider Labour Party, the general public and the people who voted for them, haven't been told that to do this thing, we need to do that thing. There's no honesty about trade-offs whatsoever. And if you want to make big decisions and difficult decisions, you have to constantly explain why it's necessary and communicate and bring people with you. Otherwise, in a democracy, it's just never going to work because people will turn against you if they think that you're imposing tough things on people with little reason, which is why you've always got to be honest about trade-offs, I think.
Can I ask you a tough question? I think it's tough.
I mean,
I don't know how you answer it, but are the Conservative partly responsible for this as well? We had multiple Conservative administrations, and the economic stagnation and the rise in taxes, and a lot of this started through the Conservative, which is why I stopped voting in the elections, because I couldn't vote for a party that I felt had drifted far too left for a Conservative party, far too left policy-wise, far too left on cultural issues. And so I kind of feel like the Conservative Party is partly responsible. It's kind of lost its way, I thought.
Look, I'm a Conservative MP, and I think we have to be searingly honest with ourselves. And look, there's a reason why the country wanted us gone in the general election last year. Now, there were some pretty big examples of how badly we screwed up. Immigration is the most obvious, where, in a way, it wasn't even a failure to deliver. It was actually a conscious choice. The post-Brexit immigration system was designed to be incredibly liberal, which was not what people had voted for. And I'm angry about that. That's a disgrace. And we should be honest with ourselves and honest with the public that that's what happened. Not least because if you're not, nobody's ever going to believe any promise you make on that ever again. We've got to try to put some of that right. I mean, some of it's just done now, but some of it we might be able to unpick, and in future we're going to need a completely different system. There are other things too. I mean, we've talked about energy prices. The Conservative Party carried on the work of the Labour Party on climate change policy, which I think has really damaged our economic interests. On the economy overall, I would say, the Conservatives came into power in 2010 in a coalition. There was an immediate job to be done in terms of a fiscal correction and trying to get the country into a better place with the deficit, which it did. My view is that certainly as the 14 years in power went on, but actually really, I think, even at the start, it was clear that there are serious problems with our economy, and it's not enough to have a fiscal policy. You've got to have an economic policy, and an economic policy needs to be much more than the kind of the Treasury orthodoxy position. And this is what I mean about asking the quite serious questions about how we produce more, what we do about the trade deficit, how we make our business environment much more competitive, how we go about reindustrializing, and as we develop the policies which take us to those positions, then I think that will amount to a serious economic policy, and it will be more than counting the beans in the Treasury, which is what that government department in particular is all about. And that's where you get into the reform of the state, which is also really important.
Well, so I know you're not a fan of Liz Truss's economics.
Yeah.
I read your article on it, but at the same time, she does talk a lot about the kind of left-wing drift of the she refers to the deep state, but essentially the institutions of government control. They have too much control. Is she fair in that analysis, in that it's tough for government to do things, especially Conservative government, where you have institutions which tend to drift left?
It is the job of anybody leading a government to make sure that the state is fit for your purpose. And it's certainly the case that the civil service needs dramatic reform, and too much power is vested in completely unaccountable organisations. We've talked a bit about energy policy. The Climate Change Committee is setting carbon budgets that no government has ever sought to challenge, even when I know from civil servants who have worked on these things that on occasion the Treasury has said, we don't believe these numbers at all. But they've still gone along with it because it's unprecedented to reject a Climate Change Committee recommendation. These kinds of things, I mean, that example is mad anyway.
Well, by the way, did you see Ed Miliband's interview yesterday?
I did indeed.
That was mad.
Yeah, well, it's the best possible advertisement for radical change on energy policy, I think. We can talk a little bit more about his policies if you like, but these quangos, these bodies, they're staffed by people the public have never heard of. No, indeed, and they're not really accountable to anybody. So there's things like the Climate Change Committee. There's the Sentencing Council, which passed these ludicrous guidelines, which were racist and destroyed the premise of equality before the law, and
they were. They didn't get through. Right?
No, indeed, but there was this.
The fact that they tried,
but we found ourselves in a situation where the Sentencing Council had said this is what must happen, and the Justice Secretary said she disagreed, and they said we don't care. Now that's wrong. No, common sense in the end prevailed, but I think only because of the political pressure that had been brought about by Rob Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary. And there's lots of these examples, and I think there's an argument for central government releasing more power, so that power and accountability are aligned better locally. But then central government needs to take on the responsibility of governing the country and stop outsourcing it to these people. And so often. And you alluded to this, so often we know that the politics of the people making the decisions in these bodies, centre-left, often not what people have voted for, and yet that is where power lies.
Very important that you don't lose this, okay? This is your inheritance through Bitcoin.
Let Bitcoin rip. Don't rip up your Bitcoin. Set up inheritance with Casa.
It's a scary thing to discover as a voter, that the people you're voting for cannot enact the policies that...
But the thing is, they can.
They can.
So we can't use it as an excuse. Okay. Because it's up to elected politicians to change these things, right?
Okay.
I mean, in the end...
But how is it difficult?
In the end, Parliament is sovereign. And if you've won a parliamentary majority and form a government, you can change these things. Yeah, it is difficult, but governing is difficult. And governing at a time like this, where we're living through all these crises that we're discussing, of course it's difficult. But if you're putting yourself up for election and saying, I know how to lead the country into the future... then you should have a bloody plan.
Well, we'll have an election in hopefully nearer to 3 years than 4 years. And I fear the state of the country at that point. But we also have a 3-horse race now. And so the chances of a parliamentary majority are lower, would you say?
Look, I think
To be seen?
I think it's all to be seen. We're still only less than a year from the last general election. I think with an electoral system like ours, having 3 parties on around about 25 points in the polls is not sustainable. So I don't think that is something that will last without some kind of big change one way or the other.
Such as?
Well, I think it's not sustainable for 3 parties to coexist on those numbers.
Yes.
So one party will have to be beaten back one way or the other. And to be frank, Conservatives should not assume that it will be another party. It could be us, which is why we have a massive responsibility to take this situation incredibly seriously. The country is facing massive challenges, and we have been in a really bad way politically. There's no God-given right for political parties to exist. So we have to put in the hard yards, and we have to be really, really honest with people and do much better.
So do you consider the Conservative Party essentially reforming itself presently? In that it understands, I mean, its real threat is from reform, and I can give you some non-factual data, non-factual data, some more kind of subjective data in that I just talk to people, and my older Conservative friends are still voting Conservative, but my younger Conservative friends are all talking about voting for reform. There's this kind of generational shift of younger people who are considering reform as the option for them. They consider it the more modern, in-touch Conservative Party, which I know might be difficult for you to hear, but it's any politician worth their salt knocks on doors and talks to their constituents, and what you said doesn't surprise me. The reason there is space for reform to do well in the opinion polls at the moment is because we have really underperformed and let people down. So a lot of people spend time in interviews talking about whether there should be deals and this kind of thing. The most important thing that the Conservative Party can do is get its act together. Is it?
And
do you believe it is?
We should get our act together.
No. Is it getting its act together? Because I like Kemi, but I don't feel like she's getting the cut through at the moment that I'd want to see. But I like her.
Yeah, look, being the leader of the opposition is arguably the toughest job in politics. In government, there's a lot of focus on the whole of the cabinet, certainly on the Prime Minister, but on the whole of the cabinet. In opposition, it's very much about the leader of the opposition. It's quite a lonely place. It requires massive strategic patience because, frankly, people are just much less interested in you than the government. And understandably, we can't change a single thing right now. So it's a tough job. She always said during the leadership campaign that she wasn't going to race into things and make mistakes by trying to go too fast. She was going to go back to first principles and build up. And that's what she's doing. And we saw her smash Starmer in PMQs last week. There are plenty of positives to see, but regardless of who could have been leader, is leader, and so on, the Conservative Party is in the position it's in because of the ways we failed when we were in government. So it's incumbent on all of us. Kemi's the one with the profile because the lights are on the leader rather than the rest of us in opposition. But it's incumbent on all of us to put our shoulders to the wheel and work with her to get the right policies and express our values in a way that make people think, yes, they're on my side. And a big part of that, I think, is about being honest about the things that, some things we got right and some things we got wrong. And I personally don't want to shy away from doing that.
What do you think it means to be a Conservative now, say in 2025?
Well, I think of all the things that are going on in the world, of all the challenges we're talking about, whether it's the rise of China, the distortions of the trade system, Russian aggression, we must never forget Islamism internationally and at home, which remains a really, really serious threat. And our domestic challenges in terms of needing to reform the state, try to restore our kind of cultural coherence, our shared identity, and to refashion our economic model. I would say actually all of those things, and I think you did allude to this, didn't you, by saying Labour have been elected at the wrong time for a Labour Party.
Well, I mean, if I was honest, I think every time is wrong for a socialist party. I mean, I just...
You won't find me disagree with that. But all of those challenges, I think, suit the Conservative mindset. Now, to me, some of where the Conservative Party has gone wrong in the past is that we have been too accommodating when it comes to certainly liberal ideology. And
it's a big topic for you.
Yeah, liberalism, it's incredible, really, because it's done this incredible job of convincing everyone it's not an ideology. It's just the natural state of things, and that's not true. It is an ideology, and I think the great power of conservatism is that it isn't. It's about sort of timeless values to do with community and belonging and obligation and so on. And I think if we can strip away some of these kind of ideological encumbrances that have built up over time, and go back to the true meaning of real conservatism, and apply those values to the problems and the challenges and the opportunities that we have now, then I think we will get there.
Is there a job then to bring the entire Conservative Party on board with that idea? Because the party itself has become a lot more liberal itself.
Yeah, no, I mean, I should say this isn't an argument to become hugely illiberal or anything like that. It's more about understanding the kind of intellectual influences that should shape the way we do our jobs. And I could really bore about this for a really long time, so stop me.
Please do.
Stop me.
If it stops me talking, it's helpful.
But if you think about liberalism in a kind of philosophical or an ideological way, it has assumptions which I don't think really hold in the real world. So a lot of it's connected to what they call the state of nature theorists, where it's basically imagine a world without government, where life's terrible. What would the kind of contract be between humans to form the government? And they kind of build the philosophy out from that. And the problem with that is of the state of nature never existed. It's not a real thing. So it tends to neglect what came before, right? So we've over time we've obviously built cultures and institutions and traditions and norms that differ from place to place, and liberalism tends to really ignore those differences. It assumes this kind of universalism, universality of perspective, and it's very quick to dismiss sort of the specificities of culture, tradition, and so on as things that inhibit your freedom. I think all of that's wrong, but you can see how that kind of logic then goes into different decisions that have been made, over the last few decades. As well, if China entering the WTO, well, they'll become they'll become more open economically. They'll become more open socially and politically because the whole world is destined to be like us, isn't it? But it isn't.
Yeah,
and actually, lots of people don't want to be like us. It's almost an arrogant perspective to think that the whole world not only wants to be like us, but is inevitably going to come this way. It's the same with the Iraq War. You end up with the perverse outcomes of Americans torturing Iraqis in the name of giving them freedom. It's a brutal example, but I think it's true, and I think you have to explore these ideas to understand the kind of flaws in the assumptions that determine how we're governed.
How do you think we've got here then?
Well, where to start with that?
Well, I mean, look, it's a leading question because I think our education system has not been particularly helpful.
Well, I think it's certainly true that some of the more worrying intellectual and ideological trends that we've seen, inevitably, it almost always starts in America but finds its way here. They come from universities and academia, and if you look at some of the things that have driven some of the craziest things in HR departments and in public sector bodies, and maybe we've got past the peak of the gender nonsense. Maybe we haven't. I mean, the argument is definitely not completely won.
I saw the debate.
Yeah. Another strong performance from Kemi, right?
I think it was possibly one of her strongest I've seen since.
Yeah.
She won the leadership.
Yeah, it was a great performance, and she's right. If you look at things like that, but if you look at some of the slightly sort of crazier applications of like intersectionality and things like that, it's mostly coming out of American universities, but very quickly comes into our universities. And things that felt very marginal not very long ago become mainstream incredibly quickly, not least because those universities are educating vast numbers of people, and
we don't have
huge percentage of people are entering the workforce every year from those universities.
You don't tend to have many conservative people in education.
Well, I think
if they have to be quiet.
Yeah, I haven't seen research for universities in this country, but I've seen some numbers in America where the numbers are absolutely overwhelming. It's like 90% of sociology professors are Democrats and that kind of thing.
I tell this story. Somebody I know is at the last general election at their junior school. They had a mock election where the kids could vote. I don't know, it's 100, 200 kids at the school, and the Green Party got a huge amount of the vote, which is good. You want kids to care about that, and Labour Party got a bunch of votes. There was one child voted Conservative, and I was like, "Who is this kid?" But it's there's two ways to look at it. There's the empathetic side of a child. I mean, it'd be very hard for a child between 5 and 10 to be a Conservative. But I also know factually within these schools, the majority of the teachers would be Labour voters, and so we've seen an increase of this kind of ideology brought to the classroom, which does concern me. Yeah,
I think you definitely see some of that. I mean, our kids are all primary school age, and I worry a lot about the catastrophizing that goes on about the environment.
Yeah,
where kids are quite scared actually by what they've been told, and just I can remember one of them coming home not that long ago saying, "Did you know that Britain only takes 1% of all the refugees in the world?" As well, did you know what percentage of the world population Britain is?
Yeah.
But obviously, the conversation wasn't had in that kind of rounded way. So
kind of hard on them. They've got to come and debate an MP father.
No, they outwit me every time. But I think politics in the classroom, it's maybe always been there a little bit. Can remember certain things that teachers said when I was growing up, but I think the universities have definitely been the kind of engines of some of the madder social and cultural policies that really, really affecting the workplace now.
So on this podcast, you are definitely hearing me talk about Bitcoin a lot. Well, why? We live in a really strange time with governments driving inflation with their reckless spending and endless money printing. There is a way out of this. There is a way to protect your money, and that is by stacking Bitcoin. I've made loads of shows about Bitcoin. You can go and research this, you can go and read the books, but the truth is it is the hardest money ever created. If you are interested in protecting your financial future, it's time for you to get on the Bitcoin train. I've been stacking Bitcoin personally and through my businesses since 2017. It's protected me, it's secured my family's future, and it also strengthens all of my businesses. So if you want to start stacking Bitcoin, where do you do it? Well, for me, it's with Gemini. They're a fully licensed, full reserve exchange and custodian, so they give you a secure way for you to buy and own your Bitcoin. There's no risks and no funny business. So if you're serious about stacking Bitcoin the right way, head over to Gemini.com, which is GEMINI.com. Conscious of time, and it is Friday. As I said, we're 3-4 years out from an election. What is the roadmap for the Conservatives to win that election?
Well, Kemi so far has said we have to hold our hands up. We got immigration badly wrong. If you look at some of the policies that the party has been putting forward on immigration as Labour's legislation is passing through the Commons, it's quite a radical shift. So we've been proposing policies that will make it easier to remove illegal immigrants, that will reduce the flow of legal migration. But I think I would say maybe the most dramatic departure is the talk of reforming indefinite leave to remain, which basically says if you've come here on time-limited visas, we will make it harder for you to get a status that allows you to stay in the medium to long term if you've committed crimes, if you're not contributing financially at a certain level, and so on. She's done something similar with net zero. She said it was a mistake to promise net zero. It was a policy without a plan, and realistically, it's probably not possible. Now we need to develop that policy in more detail, but I think it's quite clear what the direction of travel is there. So those are, I think, two of the most significant things that we got wrong when we were in power, and we need to be like that everywhere. There needs to be change, but we need to tell a compelling story about ourselves, about how we understand what we got wrong and what we got right, and how we're different now, but also about what we think the future of the country is. And that's got to be honest about how difficult things are, but it's also got to be uplifting, because it's not enough to just diagnose the problem. You have to have a proper prospectus, and that's, I think, what the job is over the next few years. But if you get all of that right, it's still not enough, because you've just got to communicate constantly and clearly, and that's the job. That's the challenge. We start from a very low base. It was the worst defeat in our history. We need to be humble about that, but we also need to show urgency and strength, and to get cracking.
Yeah, it's interesting that the two policies you talk about there are immigration and net zero, because they are two issues that really are, I think, have harmed the country. And I'm sure, as a party, you do a lot of work on focus groups and you discover this. But I personally still feel there's a lot of work to be done on the economic side of things.
Yeah.
I think this continual slide of more borrowing, more debt, more taxation, I think that's harming people in an area they don't actually fully understand. I think net zero is a lot easier to understand. I think migration is a lot easier to understand, but the economics itself is quite complicated. And I think it's very difficult to understand. And I think sometimes people don't even want to accept economic reality. I mean, we've seen this push recently for wealth tax in this country. And look, I don't mind the idea of reform where you have a wealth tax and remove inheritance tax, but that the wealth tax itself, anyone with half a brain knows it won't bring enough money, and most people leave. But I don't think many people truly understand why we say we get inflation. I don't think they understand the economic reason. And I think without broad and quite drastic economic reform, I don't know if a Conservative government can still change that trajectory where it feels like we're heading towards bankruptcy. It feels like we're heading towards what the people of Argentina have experienced for the last 2 decades, 3 decades.
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't disagree with what you said at all. I mean, I think actually immigration and net zero are obviously quite closely connected to the economy. I mean, people think of immigration actually as something with a kind of social or cultural or practical cost or challenge, but an economic benefit. Actually, the immigration that we've had is largely fiscally negative. It's killed incentives to invest in skills and training and labour-saving technologies, and it's arguably one of the reasons why productivity has been on the floor. But yeah, we need a really compelling answer on the economy, and as we've been discussing, that's no mean feat because it's not just in Britain. There are huge convulsions in the world economy, and Western workers, basically the Western working class and lower middle class, has been screwed enormously by globalization, and to some degree that can be offset by better domestic policies. But if you look at the data, Western workers have lost out big time. And we need ideas that are, as big as that to start to put things right for people. And we're also having to do it at a time where we don't even know what the world's going to look like in a few years' time because, power balances, geopolitics, changing really, really fast. And so is technology. We haven't really talked about artificial intelligence and what's around the corner. But things are moving incredibly quickly, which will make it even harder again. It's
not even around the corner. I mean, I have a tab permanently open now. I use it all day, every day. The things I'm using for is incredible. It's game changing. I mean, the other day I just put in a massive spreadsheet of sales data and I just said, interpret this for me. And within seconds, I had a complete diagnosis of the state of one of my businesses, the good, the bad, the things to change. Not only the things to change, it told me how to change it and then wrote me a marketing strategy. I mean, the pace of change is incredible. But that does potentially mean
it makes the job even harder. It makes the job even harder. But in the end, if you want to take on the responsibility of leading a country as important as ours, then you have to be willing to take on the enormity of these challenges.
What is the right size of government? I know it's an unfair question, but
yeah, I don't. I mean, there's no arbitrary number. I mean, I think some people fantasize about a certain percentage of GDP being spent by the state or whatever.
I think what I was getting at is government just too big at the moment?
So I would say there are ways in which the government is too big and too interfering, and then there are ways in which the state is absent where it should be present.
Can you expand?
Yeah, there are different ways I mean that. So if you take criminal justice, for example, it is the state is way too present in arguments about what people think and say. It is absent if your house is burgled, right? That is obviously completely the wrong way around. In the economy, pretty much every constituency visit I do, I meet somebody, whether it's a small not-for-profit social enterprise, or whether it's a really big business, or it's a new business doing something at the cutting edge of technology, doing something really amazing. The common theme is we're trying to do this really good thing and we can't because rules stop us, or regulators stop us, or the thicket of rules is so dense that the council officials just constantly find reasons to say no because it's easier. So the state really gets in the way in all sorts of ways. But then if you're looking at, if you want to reindustrialize, if you do want regions of the country that have really suffered over a period of decades to get back on their own 2 feet and to get to a place where market-led growth can really work for them again, you are going to need the state to be strong. I gave the example of place-based interventions where the state might remove certain regulations or create certain tax incentives to develop supply chains for a particular sector of the economy. It won't do that at the moment because everybody in the Treasury or elsewhere would say they'd feel uncomfortable that we were favouring one particular business or one particular sector.
Treasury just sounds like a big problem.
It is a big problem. It's a really big problem, and the government isn't there to say we just want to create a global level playing field. It's meant to be there to make sure this country is successful and as prosperous as it can be. So I think it's kind of got everything wrong. It's too obtrusive, but it's also not doing the basics that it should be doing.
I think people are looking for, well, certainly a certain group of people are looking for big, drastic change, large amounts of reform. I think we've been through multiple elections where you hear competing parties say it's time for change, and then change comes, and it's just marginal differences here, and everything. It's timid. Yeah, everything just kind of slides. And I think Donald Trump kind of scares the crap out of me, and I find him exciting at the same time. Yeah, because there is these large reforms. I don't know if he's able to do them, but I think it's quite interesting. And I think people are looking for something here where, policy-wise, it is considerable reforms to everything. I mean, because everything feels broken. To criminal justice, because you're absolutely right. Our town centre, I live in Bedford, it's a disgrace at the moment. It's plagued by drug addicts and alcoholics and shoplifters, and it's depressing. I think we need drastic tax reform. I think it's such a big job that the voters want massive amounts of change. And I think that's why, in some ways, reform have been successful, because they've promised, I don't know if they can deliver it, but promised drastic change.
They've also just channeled this kind of none of the above mentality that I know lots of voters feel. And that's what I mean when I say it's actually up to us to sort ourselves out.
Do you think that the Conservatives' real fight is with reform rather than Labour?
I think it's more complicated than that.
Okay.
But reform obviously presents a serious challenge to the Conservative Party. But they're only in that position because we have let ourselves and the country down.
Well, it feels like they're trying to destroy themselves at the moment.
So, well, I won't intrude on the grief of others. I just think we, in the end, people in politics spend a lot of time talking about the other parties and lots of time about hypothetical scenarios about what to do in this situation and that situation. But the job that's in front of the Conservative Party right now is to be really honest about the things that we got wrong and to change and to show that we're capable of rising to the challenges that the country faces. And if we do that, we won't be worrying about other political parties, because we'll have the kind of offer that the country expects one of the political parties to present to them.
Well, I hope you do it. I haven't voted in the last 3 elections, and I intend to vote in the next one because, rightly, people have called me out for it. Is there anything I've not asked you wish I had have asked?
No, it's been perfect. You're amazing.
I wish I'd had my voice properly. Hopefully we'll do this again in the future when I can actually talk, because I can't really, I've had to really kind of balance my voice, and so I don't get to say all the things I want to say. But look, I'm glad we finally got to do this. I wish you the best. I am a Conservative at heart, so
thank you.
look forward to the next election. It's just a shame it's so far away.
Yeah, I know. Well, hopefully I can come on in the future and we can talk in more detail about all the policies that we've worked on.
And a bit of football.
And a bit of football.
Quite like Villa.
Yeah, back in the Champions League again, hopefully.
Yeah, no, I quite like Villa. I think they're one of those nice clubs where...
I'm always surprised if anybody doesn't like us, because I always think we seem quite inoffensive, but...
Well, I'll tell you about my football team. So I own a football team, so we'll talk about that at some point. But look, thank you so much. I only found out when I was doing some research yesterday about your book, which I've ordered. So next time we meet, I will have read that as well, and we'll talk about it then. But thank you and good luck, and see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Sorry about my voice.